Once in a while, we get an article in the press about potentially dangerous asteroids. Now, usually it's actually about Apophis, which, as you might know already, is actually going to pass really close to planet Earth in 2029, but sometimes it's about some other asteroids passing really close to planet Earth. But in several videos you can find in the description, we've actually discussed the idea behind dangerous asteroids and how extremely unlikely any collision with any asteroid is to occur in the next few hundreds of years. And that's because NASA has a program known as Cheops, the link for which you can find in the description, that actively searches for any dangerous asteroid, always keeping everything up to date, making sure that nothing dangerous is creeping up on us, which is of course part of the terrestrial defense network in order to protect planet Earth. But there is a bit of a caveat. And the caveat is that this is only in regards to asteroids and obviously comets, and the objects we can track very easy. There is, however, something else we can track, and for many years this unnerved a few scientists because of something that happened back in 1908. And well, hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and in this video we're going to be discussing the idea behind the Taurid Swarm and the potential dangers coming from this swarm, especially because in 2032 planet Earth is going to be passing directly through it, which technically might cause a few collisions here and there. But here, without any speculations, let's actually discuss some of the science first and talk about what we know and what we don't know. Although first, so what is this swarm and what exactly formed it? Well, here's the simulation of the swarm created by the Western University, and you might already be able to tell what this unusual formation is. This is the result of an ancient comet, and we also know what comet this is most likely connected to. You can sort of see it right there. Comet Encke, also known as 2P Encke, is a typical periodic comet with an orbit of 3.3 years. And, like some other comets, it's also responsible for creating a meteor shower. And in this case, it's the Taurids, the shower that's actually peaking right now in October, and the shower that's also known to contain relatively large pieces compared to a lot of other meteor showers. But there is something else about it that's a little bit unusual. It's actually two separate showers, with a southern and a northern component, with both coming from two separate pieces. One is from Comet Encke, but the other one is from a potentially dangerous asteroid, 2004 TG10, and both of them have an extremely similar orbit. As a matter of fact, today it's believed that they very likely came from a much larger object that most likely broke apart a few thousand years ago. In case you're wondering, here's their orbit for comparison. And both of these objects are just over 1 kilometer in size. To be more exact, Encke is about 3 kilometers across, whereas 2004 TG10 is about 1.3 kilometers across. And because both objects are in a similar orbit and both contain signs of something falling apart, for several decades scientists believed that something much bigger very likely fell apart as a result of a close approach to the Sun. So some kind of a primordial comet, which is also usually referred to as Encke, but in this case much larger, potentially up to 100 kilometers in size. And when this larger piece fell apart, it created what's known as the Taurid complex, which is simulated right here. And so whatever this is, potentially contains lots of different pieces of all sorts of sizes, but exactly what pieces and how big they are has always been a mystery. Nevertheless, for many years now, this idea has been known as the Taurid complex giant comet hypothesis. Basically the idea that all of this came from a much larger comet that fell apart 10 to 11,000 years ago. But much more intriguingly, something else extremely unusual has been connected to this event. In 1908, the now famous Tunguska event that created an enormous explosion in Siberia, and that even today does not have a very good explanation, seems to have happened right in the middle of the passage through this unusual swarm. In other words, when this event occurred, Earth was actually passing through the Taurid Swarm, and so many scientists believe that this rock, or whatever this was, potentially came from it. In other words, by passing through the swarm, the chance for a really large collision maybe, possibly, increases dramatically. Or at least it has increased in 1908. But because of the orbital dynamics, Earth does not pass through the swarm every year. It goes through the regions where we actually receive the Taurid showers, but not through the region with the thickest concentration of particles that represents this ancient cometary object. And so for several decades now, some scientists have been basically speculating that maybe just maybe, this Taurid Swarm also potentially represents some kind of a danger to planet Earth. But in this case, a danger that's kind of difficult to predict. Mostly because we don't really know what's inside the swarm or even how big it is. And though in most cases meteors or those particles during meteor showers are just a little bit too small to be dangerous, the predictions here, based on the observations of several other objects, basically suggested that there could be large asteroids here, even asteroids capable of explosions much larger than Tunguska event. And in the past, scientists have even looked at the moon in order to see if there's any evidence for anything. Specifically, they looked at the increase in impacts on the moon, discovering that certain impacts did actually come from the Taurid Swarm. Which of course once again suggested that there might be a slight increase in danger when it comes to passing through the swarm. And so by discovering the signs on the moon, and by discovering that Tunguska event was potentially connected to all of this as well, along with the fact that several other objects were also connected to Encke and 2004 TG20 asteroid, altogether this basically increased the chance for a potentially hazardous collision every time Earth passes through the swarm. But all of this was still a hypothesis, and so back in 2019, several researchers wanted to see if they can actually analyze the swarm as we pass really close to it, in order to discover if there is anything dangerous in it after all. Specifically focusing on larger pieces and larger rocks, and on trying to discover how much of it is there, and how likely are any of these pieces to collide with Earth. And so after these initial observations in 2019, astronomers finally had a bit of a relief. Compared to previous assumptions and previous calculations, here by looking at potential asteroids 100 meters in size or larger, they actually found way less than expected. And that's of course really important because any one of those asteroids, if they do hit planet Earth, they could cause quite a lot of damage. And because Taurid meteor shower is actually known to contain large pieces to begin with, this has always been a bit of a concern. But instead of finding a lot of larger rocks, initially in 2019, they just discovered a bunch of rocks that seemed to be much smaller in size. As a matter of fact, something that would be a typical meteorite. So nothing too dangerous. But these observations have not stopped. As a matter of fact, scientists have been conducting them pretty much every year now, refining their search and trying to discover something dangerous after all. And that's because of one important event. The event that's going to be happening in 2032. Turns out that in November of 2032, once again planet Earth is going to be going directly through the swarm. And if you remember, in 1908 when this happened, this potentially produced the Tunguska event. So basically the question here was really simple. Is something dangerous potentially going to happen in November of 2032? Or are we more or less safe? And well now, just a few weeks ago, once again following detailed observations and very detailed calculations, specifically by using ZTF or Zwicky Transient Facility, the telescope that's able to survey very large expanses of night sky, discovering many objects all at once, scientists from the University of Maryland pretty much definitively confirmed that it's extremely unlikely that there's anything dangerous inside the Taurid Swarm. Or to be more exact, they discovered that this particular swarm does not seem to harbor any dangerous asteroids, and instead of containing hundreds and even thousands of dangerous rocks, there actually only seems to be maybe 9 to maximum 14 pieces that are extremely unlikely to come close to planet Earth, and also seem to suggest that the size of the original comet was much smaller. Not 100 kilometers, but possibly closer to 10 kilometers, or even smaller. In other words, the comet Encke and all of the additional pieces most likely represent the majority of mass. And so right now this new study suggests that the risk of a collision or even a similar event to Tunguska is extremely low, simply based on the fact that very recent and very detailed observations did not uncover any dangerous pieces. And that's of course incredible news for planetary defense. It means that there's one less thing to worry about, and it also means that the Taurid Swarm does not seem to be as dangerous as we previously believed. And obviously there are still some pieces that could potentially create a relatively large explosion, it's extremely unlikely that it's going to be happening in 2032, and it's extremely unlikely to be dangerous anytime soon. And in this case, all of this became possible because in the last few years, Earth passed relatively close to the swarm, allowing the researchers to scan all of these asteroids pretty much all at once. And inside of it, they just didn't find a lot of large pieces. But to confirm all of this is going to be done again and again in the next couple of years. And so basically in 2025 and 2026, researchers are going to be doing these observations again just to make sure that there's really nothing there. And naturally, on top of this, it's also helping us understand this idea of comets breaking apart and helps us understand what happens to these objects when they come really close to the sun and when they end up breaking apart over time. And because additional pieces like the current comet Encke are extremely likely to fall apart again, understanding how this happens and what ends up happening with these pieces afterwards is of course important. But at least for now, if you're watching this in 2032, unlike all of the press releases claiming something dangerous might happen, these studies suggest otherwise. It's extremely likely that nothing will happen, and the Taurid Swarm does not seem to be dangerous after all. But chances are we're going to be coming back and talking more about this in the next few years again, mostly because there are going to be even more discoveries from a lot of additional studies, and I'm sure at some point we might even discover additional asteroids that are kind of exciting, hiding somewhere inside the swarm. And so until then, check out some of the previous videos on a similar topic in the description below. Thank you for watching, subscribe, share this with someone who loves learning about space and sciences, come back tomorrow to learn something else, support this channel on Patreon by joining channel membership, or by buying the wonderful person t-shirt you can find in the description. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.